The branch manager did not look up when he walked in. That was the first thing, not a glance, not even the automatic reflex most people offer a stranger who has just come through a glass door on a Tuesday morning in downtown Columbus, Ohio. Just the continued shuffle of papers, the deliberate performance of being too occupied to notice. Darnell Wheeler stood at the entrance for a moment. He was wearing a charcoal blazer over a pressed white shirt. His shoes were clean. He had his son's drawing in the inside pocket of his jacket, a 7-year-old's crayon version of a building with the words "Our Store" scrawled across the top in uneven red letters. He had carried it there since the morning his son handed it to him and said, "You have to show them what we're building, Dad." He approached the desk. The branch manager, a woman in her mid-50s named Patricia Holt, finally looked up. Her expression did not change into welcome. It shifted into the particular neutral that is not neutral at all, the kind that has already made up its mind but is performing patience. She said, "Can I help you?" Not a question. The flatness of it was the message. Darnell said he had a 10 o'clock appointment. He had a business loan application. He had documentation. He had 3 years of clean financials, a business plan, letters of support, a signed lease on a commercial property on Oak Street. Patricia Holt looked at her computer screen. She said, "I see your application." A pause followed that was not a pause. It was a wall dressed as a pause. She said, "Mr. Wheeler, I have to be honest with you. Applications like this, with this type of collateral profile and this credit history, are not typically what we move forward with here." She said it the way people say things they have said many times before and have stopped examining. She said, "I'd encourage you to look into some of our smaller product offerings." Darnell Wheeler did not raise his voice. He said, "I'd like to speak with someone about the specific criteria." Patricia Holt said, "I am the someone." She slid his folder back across the counter. He picked it up. He said thank you in a voice that contained nothing she could use against him, and he walked out through the glass door into the Columbus morning. She watched him go. She had already moved on to the next thing before the door finished closing. 3 hours later, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot of First Meridian Bank's corporate headquarters, 2 blocks north. Then a second, then a car that her assistant would later describe as government adjacent, and a man Darnell Wheeler recognized stepped out of the building's front entrance to meet them. That man was the chairman of First Meridian Bank's board of directors. He was walking toward Darnell Wheeler with his hand extended. Patricia Holt, watching from her second-floor window, felt something cold move through her. She had just rejected the man who was about to buy the building she worked in. If you're watching this and you've ever walked into a room and been told without a single word that you don't belong there, drop your city in the comments below. Let us know where you're from. And if this is your first time here, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that doesn't make the news, but absolutely should. Stay with us. Darnell Wheeler grew up in the Linden neighborhood of Columbus, in a house on Sunbury Road that his grandmother had bought in 1971. With money she saved from 15 years of cleaning office buildings downtown. She used to say the building doesn't know whose hands cleaned it. It only knows if it's clean. He heard that sentence so many times as a child that he stopped hearing it. The way you stop hearing traffic if you've lived near a highway long enough. It was just part of the background frequency of being raised by Eleanor Wheeler, a woman who was 5'2" and made rooms feel smaller when she walked into them, not because she was loud, but because she was present in a way that demanded attention without asking for it. Darnell's father left when Darnell was 4. He did not leave dramatically. He just gradually became less present and then became absent, and the absence became permanent. There were no fights about it in the house. Eleanor Wheeler did not speak about it in ways that created wounds. She simply redirected every unit of energy toward the 2 things she cared about, the house and Darnell. He was a quiet child. Teachers noted it without knowing what to do with it. Quiet was either a problem or a gift depending on which teacher you had, and Darnell had both kinds. He was observant in the way that children who do not have the luxury of being careless become observant. He noticed when adults were performing their words rather than meaning them. He noticed when the rules applied differently to different people. He noticed without bitterness because Eleanor had not raised him with bitterness. She had raised him with attention. He was good at math, not in the way that teachers called gifted, though some did. Good in the way that problems made sense to him as systems. He could see the architecture of a problem before he could name the method. By high school, he was helping other students not by giving answers, but by asking them questions that made the answers obvious. A teacher named Mr. Caldwell pulled him aside once and said, "You know what you're doing is called Socratic method, and it's been around since ancient Greece." Darnell had said, "It's just asking the thing that's true." He studied business at Ohio State on a partial scholarship and a combination of work-study jobs that left him tired in a way he learned to carry without showing. He worked in the university's facilities department for 2 years, fixing things. He worked at a copy center downtown. He worked briefly for a small property management company, and there he found the thing that would become his life's work. He was extraordinarily good at seeing what a neglected space could become, not imagining it, seeing it, the way a carpenter sees the chair inside the wood. He graduated and took a job at a commercial real estate firm, where he was the only black analyst for the first 3 years. He was not poorly treated in ways that created a record. He was poorly treated in ways that left no evidence. Passed over for client meetings, excluded from informal lunches where decisions were made, praised for his work in the same sentences that credited someone else for it. He stayed for 5 years. He learned everything they would teach him and several things they didn't intend to. He left without drama and without enemies, which was its own form of precision. He started Wheeler Property Group with $11,000 and a desk in a shared workspace on High Street. His first deal was a small commercial space in Franklinton that 3 other investors had passed on because the roof had issues and the neighborhood had a bad reputation. Darnell had looked at the space 4 times. He knew the roof. He knew the neighborhood's actual trajectory. He bought it, fixed the roof, leased it to a Haitian restaurant that became, within 18 months, one of the most written about small restaurants in Columbus. He did that again and again and again. He was deliberate in a way that looked like slowness to people who valued speed. He never acquired a property he had not personally walked 3 times. He never signed a lease without understanding the tenant's actual business, not just their concept. He believed that a property was only as good as the life being lived inside it, and that belief shaped every decision he made. By the time his wife Camille was diagnosed, Wheeler Property Group had a portfolio of 14 commercial properties and was quietly profitable in the way that serious businesses are profitable, without flash, without press releases, without the performance of success. Camille Okafor Wheeler was an emergency room nurse at Ohio Health Riverside. She was the kind of person who made you feel that your problem was the only problem in the room, a quality that served her well in trauma care and in marriage. She had grown up in Lagos and Akron, in equal measure, her family having moved when she was 11, and she carried both cities in her. She was funny in a way that sneaked up on you. She was honest in a way that occasionally startled even people who thought they wanted honesty. The cancer was stage 3 when they found it. She fought it with the same focused energy she brought to everything. There were 8 months of hope and treatment and the particular intimacy that serious illness creates between 2 people. And then there were 4 months of knowing, and then there was a Tuesday morning in March when Darnell sat in a hospital room chair, holding her hand, while their son Marcus slept in the chair beside him, and Camille said, "He's going to need you to be unbreakable for a while." Darnell said, "I know," she said, "and then you can break a little, when he's old enough to hold some of it with you." She was gone by that afternoon. Their son was 5 years old. Darnell raised him alone. He did this without complaint and without the performance of struggle that people sometimes use to make others feel the weight of what they carry. He did it as a series of daily decisions, morning routines that were firm enough to give the boy structure and loose enough to give him breathing room. Dinners cooked at home 4 nights a week. School pickup at 3:15 every day, never a babysitter when he could be there instead. Homework at the kitchen table where Darnell worked on his own files while his son worked on his. They sat together. That was the whole architecture of it. His son's name was Isaiah. He was 7 by the time this story reaches its center. He had his mother's eyes and his father's way of thinking about problems, the ability to see the thing inside the thing. He had recently become interested in buildings after Darnell took him to see one of the renovated properties on a Saturday morning, and he had stood in the empty space and asked, "Dad, did this used to be sad?" Darnell had looked at the high ceilings, the repaired plaster, the light coming in through cleaned windows. He said, "I think it was just waiting." Isaiah had considered this seriously, and then said, "How did you know it was the kind of sad that could be fixed?" Darnell had not answered immediately. He thought about it while they walked through the space together. He said, "You look at the bones. The bones tell you." Isaiah had nodded as if this were engineering, which in some ways it was. Every morning, Darnell drove Isaiah to Jefferson Elementary on Morse Road. Every morning he sat in the carpool line with the other parents. He had been doing this for 2 years, and in those 2 years he had learned that carpool lines at elementary schools are their own civilization, with social hierarchies and unwritten rules and people who hold territory the way small animals hold territory, with total seriousness and zero self-awareness. He did not want a war with anyone in the carpool line. He wanted to drop his son off and go to work. This was not always possible. The situation had been building for 6 weeks before it arrived at its full shape. Her name was Renee Calloway. She lived in the Clintonville neighborhood, 4 blocks from Jefferson Elementary. She was in her mid-40s, divorced, and had a daughter in Isaiah's class named Becca, who was a bright girl with her mother's confidence, and fortunately, not yet her mother's certainty. Renee drove a white Lexus SUV that she positioned in the carpool line with the authority of someone who believed the line had been designed around her schedule specifically. She had noticed Darnell in the way that people notice something they have already decided to find suspicious. He drove a clean but unremarkable black truck. He arrived at the same time every day. He sat quietly. He sometimes had documents in the passenger seat. He occasionally spoke on the phone via Bluetooth with a low voice and precise language. She had decided this was unusual. The first incident was minor. She had gestured for him to move forward, and he had not moved because there was a child in the walkway ahead. She had honked. He had waited. She had leaned out her window and said, "The line moves when I wave it forward." He had said nothing. The second incident was more pointed. She had complained to the school's assistant principal that a parent in the carpool line was behaving in a quote-unquote intimidating manner. The assistant principal, who had seen Darnell Wheeler sit quietly in the same spot every school morning for 2 years, had thanked her for her concern and explained that she had not received any other reports. Renee Calloway had found this unsatisfying. By the 5th week, she had escalated to calling the local non-emergency police line twice to report a man sitting in a truck outside an elementary school who she described as suspicious and not known to her. The responding officer, a young woman named Corporal Torres, had spoken with Darnell both times. Both times she had also spoken with school staff who confirmed he was a parent. Both times she had filled out a report that said, in bureaucratic language, "not suspicious." Darnell had watched Corporal Torres drive away both times and then looked at his watch and then driven to his office. He had not called a lawyer. He had not posted about it. He had not spoken to anyone at the school about his frustration, though the frustration was real and fully formed and sat in his chest like something with weight and edges. He had called his grandmother Eleanor, who was 81 and still sharp as new wire, and she had listened to the whole thing and then said, "Is your work going forward?" He had said yes. She had said, "Then that is the answer to all of it." He had sat with that for a moment. She said, "The work is the argument, baby. It always has been." Renee Calloway had not stopped. In the 6th week, she had filed a formal complaint with the school district claiming that the carpool protocol was creating a safety issue due to a parent who refused to cooperate with traffic management. She included a description. She did not include a name. She did not need to. She had also, in a moment that would later become significant, posted about it in the Clintonville neighborhood online forum. She had written, "Has anyone else noticed the man in the black truck at Jefferson Carpool? Something about his behavior seems off, and I've already contacted police twice. We need to protect our kids." The post had 47 responses. 39 of them were other parents, most of them women, asking Renee to provide more information and expressing support. 6 of them were people asking whether she had spoken to the individual directly. 2 of them were people who knew Darnell Wheeler and immediately contacted him. Darnell read the post on a Wednesday evening after Isaiah was in bed. He read it once. He closed his phone. He went to his desk and worked for 2 more hours on a document that had nothing to do with Renee Calloway. Then he went to bed. He did not respond to the post. What Renee Calloway did not know, what no one in the Jefferson Elementary carpool line knew, what Patricia Holt at First Meridian Bank did not know, and what most people in Darnell Wheeler's daily life had no access to, was that he had been working quietly for 14 months on the most significant acquisition of his career. It had started with a conversation. His attorney, a woman named Sandra Osei, who had been his legal counsel for 6 years, had called him in January of the previous year with information she had received through a private equity contact. First Meridian Bank, one of Columbus's mid-sized regional banks, with 7 branches in Franklin County and a commercial real estate lending portfolio that Darnell had been watching for 3 years, was in trouble. Not headline trouble, quiet trouble, the kind that produces certain patterns in quarterly filings if you know where to look. Sandra had looked. The patterns were there. Capital ratios were under pressure. A commercial loan portfolio had 2 large non-performing assets that had not been properly disclosed in investor communications. Senior leadership was in conflict. The board was divided between 2 factions and had been unable to make decisions for 11 months. Sandra had said, "It is possible that a well-structured private acquisition offer brought at the right time and supported by the right relationships could succeed here." Darnell had said, "How possible?" She had said, "More possible than most people would think." He had spent 3 weeks deciding. Not the decision itself, he knew what the decision would be. The 3 weeks were about understanding every dimension of the risk before he committed to it. He went through the bank's public filings line by line. He commissioned a private analysis from a financial advisory firm in Cleveland. He flew to Chicago to meet with an institutional investor named Howard Reeves, who had twice backed Darnell's larger deals and who had the appetite for something at this scale. Howard Reeves was 72 years old, a former banker himself, and he had a way of listening to a proposal that was entirely still. He did not nod. He did not interrupt. He simply received information, as though it were being deposited somewhere and would earn interest. He had listened to Darnell's full presentation. Then he had said, "You've been watching this institution for 3 years." Darnell said, "Yes." Howard said, "What made you start watching it?" Darnell said, "They rejected a loan application of mine 4 years ago for a deal that returned 22% in 14 months. Howard had been quiet for a moment. He said, "So you watched them?" Darnell said, "I watched the pattern. The loan committee was making decisions that didn't track with sound risk assessment consistently. It was either bias or incompetence. Both create the same kind of institutional fragility." Howard had looked at him for a long moment. He said, "I'm in." From there, the work had been 14 months of careful, private, exhausting construction. Sandra Osei led the legal structure. Howard's investment vehicle provided 40% of the capital. Darnell's own assets, accumulated over 12 years of disciplined acquisition, provided another significant stake. 3 additional investors were brought in, all vetted by Sandra, all people who understood long timelines and did not need noise to stay committed. The regulatory process was handled by a firm in Washington that specialized in bank acquisition filings. The FDIC process moved at its own pace, which is the pace of institutions that have seen many things and are not impressed by urgency. Sandra had told Darnell early on, "You cannot rush this. Any attempt to rush this will end it." He had said, "I know how to wait." She had looked at him and said, "I believe you." They had filed with the Federal Reserve and the FDIC in March. By September, the acquisition structure had been approved contingent on final capitalization and board consent. The board consent had required 6 months of relationship work by Sandra and by Darnell himself, private conversations with individual board members, detailed presentations about the vision for the institution, patient listening to their concerns, careful answers that did not overpromise. In November, 9 months after the process formally began, and 14 months after the first conversation, the board voted 5-3 in favor. The acquisition would be finalized on a Tuesday in December. The public announcement would come the same afternoon. That morning at 10 o'clock, Darnell Wheeler had had an appointment at the First Meridian Bank branch on Broad Street. He had wanted to see it, to sit in the chair, to look across the desk one more time at the institution that had told him he was not the right profile. Patricia Holt had not looked up when he came in. He drove from the bank to the corporate headquarters building in a state that was not quite calm and not quite anything else. Sandra Osei was already in the lobby when he arrived. She was wearing a dark blue suit, and she looked at him the way she always looked at him before significant moments, with a professional stillness that was also, underneath it, a kind of loyalty. She said, "Boardroom is ready. Howard's already upstairs." He said, "How's the room feeling?" She said, "It feels like a room that's about to change who owns it." They took the elevator to the 14th floor. Howard Reeves was standing at the window looking at Columbus. He turned when Darnell came in and said, "There he is." There were 9 people in the room in addition to Sandra and Howard. 3 members of the existing board, who had been the decisive votes and who had agreed to remain on the transitional board. 2 representatives from the Federal Reserve's regional office. 1 FDIC examiner, a corporate attorney named James Whitfield, who represented the selling shareholders. And the sitting chairman of First Meridian Bank, a man named Gerald Park, who had been one of the 5 votes in favor and who had said to Darnell in a private meeting 2 months earlier, "I want this bank to be what it was supposed to be when we started it." The signing took 40 minutes. Documents circulated. Signatures were placed. The Federal Reserve's representative confirmed regulatory approval. The FDIC examiner signed the final compliance sheet. At 12:47 in the afternoon, Darnell Wheeler became the controlling shareholder of First Meridian Bank. Gerald Park crossed the room and shook his hand and said, "She's yours now." Sandra Osei allowed herself a small smile. Howard Reeves said, 12 years. Darnell said, 14 months on this one. Howard said, "I meant 12 years since I first met you at that conference in Cincinnati and thought, that man is going to do something serious one day." Darnell looked at him for a moment. He said, "You never told me that." Howard shrugged and said, "Didn't want to make you nervous." The press release went out at 2:15. The Columbus Dispatch had it on their website within the hour. The local NBC affiliate sent a reporter to the corporate headquarters at 3. Sandra handled the statement. Darnell gave a brief interview in the lobby, saying that First Meridian would continue to serve Franklin County's communities, that its commercial lending practices would be reviewed and restructured, and that he was committed to building an institution that served all of Columbus. He said nothing about the branch on Broad Street. He said nothing about Patricia Holt. He did not need to. Patricia Holt learned about it from her assistant, who had seen the news alert on her phone and came to the doorway of Patricia's office with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not succeeding. She said, "Mrs. Holt, have you seen the news?" Patricia had not. She was eating lunch at her desk. She looked at the phone her assistant held out and read the headline. She read it again. She set down her fork. The photograph accompanying the article was of Darnell Wheeler at the lobby press conference, relaxed, composed, one hand in the pocket of the charcoal blazer he had been wearing 3 hours earlier, when he stood at her counter and she slid his folder back across to him. She recognized the blazer. She remembered his face, the way he had not reacted, the way he had said thank you and meant nothing by it and everything by it, the way the door closed behind him while she was already thinking about something else. Her assistant was still standing in the doorway. Patricia said, "Close the door, please." She sat alone in her office for 23 minutes. She was not a person who cried easily. She did not cry now, but there was a process happening inside her that was not comfortable and could not be stopped. It was the process of understanding, specifically and in sequence, every assumption she had brought to that interaction, the way she had not looked up, the neutral that was not neutral, the applications like this, the smaller products. The folder slid across the counter before she had looked at it fully, or at him fully, or at anything with full attention. She had done it quickly, efficiently, in a way that felt like professional judgment and was something else entirely. She sat with that. The phone rang. She did not answer it. Her assistant knocked twice and opened the door and said, "Mrs. Holt, the regional director is on the line." Patricia said she needed 5 more minutes. She got 3. The regional director, a man named Tom Griggs, who always led with damage control, called her on her cell instead. He was already in management of the narrative. He wanted to know if there had been any interaction with the new owner prior to close of business today. Patricia told him about the morning. There was silence on Tom's end. Then he said, "You rejected his loan application." Patricia said it did not meet our standard criteria. Tom said nothing for a moment that contained a great deal. He said, "I'm going to need you to come to a meeting tomorrow morning." Patricia sat at her desk after the call. Outside her second-floor window, the parking lot was mostly empty. The afternoon had gone grey and cool. The SUVs were gone. The car that her assistant had described as government-adjacent was gone. She thought about the folder, his expression when she slid it back, the blazer, the shoes. The way he had arrived prepared in the way that people arrive prepared when they know they will need to be impeccable, and still it may not matter. She thought about how quickly she had moved on. This was the hardest part to sit with, not the decision itself, the speed of it, the ease, the way it had required no real effort from her, no deliberation, no examination of evidence. The folder had not met the criteria because she had applied the criteria to the folder the way a template is applied, without looking at the actual thing beneath it. She did not know, sitting in that office, how to undo this. She did not know if undo was even the correct frame. She sat there until her assistant knocked again and said the branch was closing, and did Mrs. Holt need anything before she left. Patricia said no. She sat alone in the building for another half hour. Then she got her coat and her purse, and she drove home through Columbus at the end of a day she had not expected to live. Isaiah was in the kitchen when Darnell got home at 5:45. He was at the table doing homework with the organized chaos that children produce, pencils at every angle, an eraser's worth of pink rubber crumbs distributed across his work. He looked up when the door opened. He said, "Did it happen?" Darnell set his keys on the counter. He said, "It happened." Isaiah considered this with the seriousness that he brought to important information. Then he said, "Does that mean we own a bank?" Darnell said, "We are the primary shareholder of a regional banking institution." "Yes." Isaiah thought about this. He said, "Is that the same as owning it?" Darnell said, "More or less." Isaiah said, "Can I have a lollipop from the bank?" Darnell laughed. It was the first time he had laughed all day, fully, from somewhere real. He sat down at the table across from his son and picked up a pencil and looked at the math worksheet in front of him and said, "Finish this first." Isaiah went back to his homework with the sigh of a person returning to an unjust obligation. Darnell looked at the worksheet. 4th column, 3rd problem. His son had set it up correctly and made an error in the 3rd step, a transposing of digits, the kind of error that is not a misunderstanding, but a small, careless moment. He said nothing. He waited. Isaiah reached the end of the worksheet and looked up. Darnell said, "Check column 4 again." Isaiah looked. He found it. He fixed it. He said, "How did you know without looking?" Darnell said, "I looked." Isaiah said, "You barely looked." Darnell said, "Sometimes barely is enough." Isaiah erased and rewrote and put down his pencil with finality. He said, "Dad." Darnell said, "Yeah." Isaiah said, "Is the bank near school?" Darnell said, "There's a branch about a mile from school." "Why?" Isaiah said, "Because Becca Calloway's mom told Becca that you are probably not supposed to be in the neighborhood, and Becca told me." Darnell was quiet for a moment. He said, "What did you say to Becca?" Isaiah looked at him with the clear-eyed directness of a child who has his mother's eyes. He said, "I said my dad goes wherever he wants, because he knows more about this city than anybody." Darnell looked at his son. He said, "That's close enough." Isaiah said, "Am I right?" Darnell said, "You're right." They made dinner together, spaghetti with the sauce from the jar that Isaiah preferred over the made-from-scratch version, which was a preference Darnell had given up debating. They ate at the table with the television off. Isaiah talked about a project at school involving bridges and structural integrity, which he was genuinely interested in and which Darnell was genuinely interested in hearing about. They did dishes together, Isaiah washing and Darnell drying, a system they had established 2 years earlier and had never formally discussed as a system. It had simply become the way things were done. Darnell's phone rang 3 times during dinner. He did not answer it. After Isaiah was in bed, he sat in the living room with a cup of tea and the folder he had brought home. Not the business folder, a different folder, kept in a drawer in his desk that held 3 things: a photograph of Camille taken at Lake Erie the summer before she got sick, Isaiah in the background, mid-run, with the expression of pure physical joy that children have when they are running simply because running is possible, a letter Eleanor had written him when he started Wheeler Property Group, and a crayon drawing on construction paper of a building with the words "Our Store" across the top. He sat with the folder open in his lap for a while. He was not thinking about the bank. He was thinking about Camille, the specific sensation of sitting next to her in a room late at night, working on parallel things, the quiet company of someone who understood what you were building. He missed it with a specific weight. He put the folder back in the drawer. He turned out the light and went to bed. He slept. Renee Calloway did not sleep easily that night. She had seen the news. Everyone in Clintonville had seen the news by 7. The neighborhood forum had erupted. The post about the suspicious man in the black truck was still up. 47 responses and counting. Except now some of those responses were being deleted by the people who had written them, and new ones were appearing that she did not want to read. Someone had connected the dots. Someone had written the name. Someone had written a 4-paragraph response that she had read once and closed immediately. Her daughter Becca came into the kitchen at 8 o'clock for a snack and said, "Mom, did you know Isaiah's dad bought a bank today?" Renee said, "I saw that." Becca said, "Isaiah said his dad knows more about this city than anybody." Renee said, "That's nice." Becca said, "Do you think that's true?" Renee looked at her daughter's open, curious face. She said, "I think it might be." Becca went back to her room. Renee sat in her kitchen with the post open on her phone. She had written it quickly, in the vague and plausible language people use when they want to communicate something they cannot quite say outright. Suspicious, not known to me, something about his behavior. She had used the language of concern, of maternal protection, of community safety, and she had aimed all of it at a man who arrived at the same place every day at the same time to pick up his child. She had called the police. Twice. She had filed a complaint with the school district. She knew, sitting in the kitchen while her daughter ate a granola bar in the other room, that these things could not be undone. They were in reports. They were in records. They had landed on a man who was quietly doing something that most people in that neighborhood with their investments and their home equity lines and their civic pride would never attempt. She deleted the post. It was too late for the deletion to matter. Screenshots were already circulating. It was not too late in the only way that still had some meaning, which was as an acknowledgement, private and witnessed only by the empty kitchen, that she had been wrong, not mistaken. Wrong. There was a difference, and she sat with it. The forum continued without her. She put her phone face down on the counter and stayed at the table for a long time. 2 days passed. The press coverage settled. Sandra Osei appeared on a local morning radio program to discuss the acquisition and its implications for the bank's commercial lending focus in underserved Columbus neighborhoods. Howard Reeves issued a statement from his Chicago office. The Regional Business Journal ran a profile of Darnell that included his childhood in Linden and Eleanor Wheeler's history with the house on Sunbury Road. Eleanor called after the profile came out. She said, "They spelled my name right, which is more than most people manage." He said, "I checked the draft." She said, "Did you?" He said, "I wasn't going to let them get Grandma's name wrong." She was quiet for a moment in the warm way she was quiet. She said, "Your grandfather would have liked this. Not for the bank, for the way you did it." Quiet. He said, "The work is the argument." She said, "Don't you get smart with me." He laughed. She said, "Come see me Sunday. Bring my grandson. I want to show him the house." He said, "He's going to ask you 100 questions." She said, "Good. I have answers." He sat on the back porch after the call. The December morning was cold and clear. The yard was dormant, the trees bare against a white sky. He had plans for a community development project associated with the bank's revised lending mission, 4 neighborhoods in Columbus that had been systematically undercapitalized for 30 years and were now, with the right institutional support, ready for the kind of patient investment that he understood better than anyone. Isaiah came out the back door in his coat and stood beside him. He said, "What are you looking at?" Darnell said, "Just the yard." Isaiah looked at the yard. He said, "Are we going to do something with it?" Darnell looked at his son. He said, "What would you do with it?" Isaiah looked at the dead grass, the bare trees, the cold ground. He said, "I'd wait until spring and see what it wants to be. Darnell was quiet. He said, "Yeah, that's probably right." She came on a Saturday morning. Renee Calloway parked on the street, not in the driveway. She sat in her car for a moment before getting out. She was carrying a glass dish covered in foil, a shallow casserole with the slightly nervous appearance of something that had been made carefully. She walked to the front door and knocked. Darnell opened it. He did not look surprised. He did not look cold. He looked at her with the particular steadiness that was simply his face at rest, a face that had decided some time ago not to make things easier by pretending they were simpler than they were. Renee held out the dish. She said, "I made too much of this. It's a sweet potato casserole. Becca's been begging me to make it for weeks, and I always make too much." He took it. She said, "I wanted to say." She stopped. She started again. She said, "I want you to know that I understand that I was wrong, not just in one moment, in a pattern of moments." He was quiet. She said, "I'm not asking for anything by that. I just wanted to say it to your face." From behind Darnell, Isaiah appeared, which he often did in doorways, materializing from rooms with the silent curiosity of a child who has learned that important things happen in doorways if you stay close enough. He looked at Renee. He looked at the foil-covered dish. He said, "Is that for us?" Renee looked at him. Her face did something complicated. She said, "Yes, your dad can tell you what's in it." Isaiah said, "Is Becca coming?" Renee blinked. She said, "She's at her grandmother's today." Isaiah considered this and then said, "Tell her I said she can come over sometime if she wants. We have a porch." She said she'd never been on a porch before, which I told her was impossible, but she said it's true. Renee said, "I'll tell her." Darnell looked at his son, and then at the woman standing in his doorway. He said, "Thank you for this." He said it the way he said things that were true without being complete. The sentence was a door open just enough, not all the way. The distance between where they were and any version of easy was real, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. Not for her comfort, not for his own sense of generosity, but a door. She nodded. She understood what was offered and what was not. She said, "Enjoy it." She walked back to her car. Darnell closed the door. Isaiah was already pulling the foil off the edge of the dish. He said, "Dad, this smells incredible." Darnell said, "Don't put your fingers in it." Isaiah said, "I'm checking the structural integrity." Darnell looked at his son, this 7-year-old, who used phrases like structural integrity in the context of a sweet potato casserole, and something moved through him that was not sadness and was not its opposite, but was somewhere in the specific geography between them, where most of living actually happens. He said, "Put it in the kitchen." Isaiah carried it carefully down the hallway, both hands on the glass, the serious physical focus of a child trusted with something real. On a Sunday in December, 2 weeks after the acquisition closed, Darnell drove to the branch on Broad Street. He had a key now. That was new. He let himself in through the front entrance, the same glass door. The branch was empty. The lights were off except for the security circuits. It looked like what a bank looks like when the people have left it, all its systems and furniture and architecture visible without the daily business of human presence to fill it. He walked to the teller windows. He walked past the desk where Patricia Holt had sat with her papers. She had been transferred to an administrative role during the acquisition transition process, which was standard. Whether she would stay with the institution was not yet determined. Whether she had sat in her own version of a kitchen at night understanding something that could not be returned was between her and herself. It was not his accounting to complete. He walked to the back of the branch where the small conference room was, the one with the window that looked out on the parking lot. He stood in it for a while. He was not performing a moment. He was just standing in a room that was now part of something he had built. He had the folder in his jacket, Isaiah's drawing. He had considered framing it somewhere in the corporate offices. Sandra had thought it was a fine idea, but he had decided no, not for display. It was not a performance of what he had done. It was a record of why. He kept it in the inside pocket. He turned off the conference room light. He walked back through the empty branch, past the empty desks, past the counter, to the glass door. He pushed it open. The Columbus morning was cold and quiet and fully itself, the kind of December morning that does not promise anything except that it is present and exact. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He had calls to return, a community development proposal to finalize. Isaiah had a school presentation on bridges and structural integrity in 2 weeks, and wanted to visit an actual construction site beforehand. Eleanor wanted them at her house on Sunbury Road on Sunday. Howard Reeves had sent a handwritten note that Darnell had read twice and filed carefully. Sandra had a preliminary agenda for the first board meeting of the new structure. There was, as there always was, and as there always would be, the ordinary forward weight of a life being built. He let the door close behind him. He walked to his truck. He had somewhere to be. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the kind of channel that rewards the ones who do. Every story we tell is built on the same foundation. The work is the argument. It always has been,